You are watching the World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. Well, Iran's leadership has said it is weighing a response to this weekend's Israeli airstrikes as the country called on the UN Security Council to meet today. Meanwhile, as per reports, Israel's strike has crippled Iran's missile production. Egypt's president has announced his country has proposed a two-day ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, during which 4 hostages held in Gaza would be freed. There was no immediate response from Israel or Hamas as the latest talks were expected in Qatar, another key mediator. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is on a 3-day visit to India, during which he will hold delegation-level talks with Prime Minister Modi. This is the first visit by a Spanish president to India in 18 years. Several MAGA speakers hurled racist insults at the illegal immigrants and Vice President Kamala Harris in the United States at former President Donald Trump's Madison Square Garden rally in New York City. A comedian's controversial performance at Trump's rally has ignited widespread backlash after he referred to Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage and made a series of racist remarks targeting Latino and Black attendees. Japanese elections are normally steady and boring affairs, but this snap election was neither. The coalition, led by Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party, has lost its majority in parliament, its worst result for over a decade. India's Arman Bhatia completed a historic treble at the PWR India Masters event for Pickleball, winning all 3 championship finals. Well, our big focus, Iran is seemingly downplaying Israel's long-anticipated retaliatory strikes, as many have pointed out. Described by the Israel Defense Forces as precise strikes, Tehran has so far avoided pledging a definitive response to Saturday's attack, as the country's regime faces both a challenging economy and a fight over its future leadership, as per analysts. Israel's strike, though, killed 4 soldiers and seems to have targeted military sites. As far as the reaction from the United States is concerned, Joe Biden has said he hoped this marked the end in escalatory actions between Israel and Iran, as the White House seeks to revert the conflict to a shadow war and not an overt war, as per some Middle East and US analysts. We have reactions lined up for you. Listen in.
قدرت و توانایی و ابتکار و اراده ملت ایران رو هنوز درست نتوانستن بفهمن. این رو ما باید به اینها بفهمونیم. کیفیت کار رو مسئولین ما باید تشخیص بدن و درست بفهمن و اون چی که صلاح این کشور و این ملت هست اون رو انجام بدن.
מי שפוגע בנו, אנחנו פוגעים בו. זהו העיקרון שהנחה אותנו עד היום, וזה העיקרון שינחה אותנו גם בהמשך הדרך. התקיפה באיראן הייתה מדויקת ועוצמתית, והשיגה את כל מטרותיה.
Well, Iran's leadership has said it is weighing a response to this weekend's Israeli airstrikes, as the country has called on the UN Security Council to meet today. Joining us for further clarity, Dr. Reza Khanzadeh, Middle East expert and Iran analyst. Also on the broadcast with us, geopolitical analyst Irina Sukuman. Thank you so much for making time for us on NDTV. Dr. Reza, to you first. Now, some reports citing sources have highlighted that Israel's retaliatory strike against Iran took out a critical component in Iran's ballistic missile program. In fact, the mixers, they're highly sophisticated equipment that Iran cannot produce on its own, is what we're hearing, and they need to purchase it from China. Dr. Reza, has this been a huge blow for Iran?
Thanks for having me. To phrase it as a huge blow, I think that remains to be seen, but as far as the data that we have seen thus far, especially from the types of open source analysis that is currently going on and ongoing, it does seem to be a significant blow to the regime. We have to keep in mind that, like you said, Iran is very limited in the number of ballistic missiles and most military types of equipment that they have, with all the sanctions that are imposed on them, and also their main backer militarily being Russia, also in a war with Ukraine, they have very limited access to the amount of ballistic missiles that they typically would have. So with these strikes by Israel, it does set them back for a number of years, I believe, for them to kind of regain and get back to where they are now. At the best, I think they have about over 3,000 short-term ballistic missiles that can't reach Israel. So yeah, this would be a significant blow. Now, as far as a huge blow, we would have to wait and see, because a long-term strategy, I think, for Iran would be not so much attacks from Iran, but kind of re-strengthening and regrowing Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, and using their proxies more, moving forward.
Irina, meanwhile, do you agree with the assessment that Iran has to weigh the likely diplomatic damage to its improving relations with its Arab partners of mounting a further attack? Then there's the impact on its ailing economy, and the likelihood that a further Israeli strike would actually cause considerably more damage than Friday's softening up exercise. Irina, I think you're on mute at the moment.
I think that's partially correct. I think Iran certainly has to be careful in any future direct strikes. But however, I don't believe that this particular strike will completely eradicate its capacity. Moreover, Iran in the past has shown willingness to rely more on its other partners when it faced a critical shortage of components or weapons. It could purchase more of the fuel from China, or it could purchase more missiles. It could reduce the number of missiles that it sends to Russia. It could also rely more on North Korea, another potential partner in this in the axis that Iran has formed with China and Russia as well. In terms of diplomatic relations, any signal of weakness on Iran's part will be a far more powerful blow to these relations than any moral or ethical considerations on its part. And right now, Iran is signaling weakness. Hezbollah has been militarily weakened. It is true that there is a growing extremism, and some of these operations have also been used as a recruitment tool for ideological warfare, but ideological warfare is a long-term project. In the short term, Iran is weakened, although it's not weakened as much as it could be. It's not completely debilitated. All of these strikes have been warning strikes to avoid escalation. They've been deterrence value. They have not been of such values that they could degrade Iranian capabilities completely or destroy some of its long-range missiles and drones that it has in its capacity. Moreover, the Houthis, while Hezbollah and Hamas have been damaged, Houthis have actually grown in strength and sophistication over time. They're still not where Hezbollah is, but they are growing, and it is possible that Iran will be investing more in them, especially if Russia is also involved.
Well, it has then definitely dealt a significant blow to Iran, as you've both highlighted. But Dr. Reza, if we go by the latest polling that's been conducted by the Middle East Institute, that clearly shows that public support for Iran's costly foreign policy is now fragile.
Yeah, absolutely. The Islamic Republic is being stretched thin to a point where their own survival now could be at risk. There's even very faint whispers and rumors that Supreme Leader of Iran, Khamenei, is terminally ill, and he may have maybe a year, maybe less, depending on the types of medical treatment that he gets.
Right.
So if we take that into consideration, also the continued domestic problems that plague the regime, with almost monthly protests in opposition to the regime, and also with these strikes by Israel, going back to what we were saying earlier, this really puts Iran essentially in a box, if you will, where on the one hand they have to show strength or else they'll seem weak. But in order to show strength, it'll make them weaker because they have a finite number of, missiles, ballistic missiles, what have you, and they're playing essentially a war of attrition with it, against Israel, to where Israel is backed by the United States, where there's essentially unlimited, military capabilities, and Iran is essentially backed by Russia, perhaps China, but I doubt China will, really step in to kind of pick up the gap where it is from Russia. So essentially, Iran is going to run out essentially of that type of military capability. So they may show strength now in the short term, but this type of regime does not stay in power for almost 50 years without calculating that long-term, strategy. So I think because they're stretched thin at this point, regionally, domestically, internationally, with the sanctions and the loss of so much, military capabilities, I think they're going to be a bit more strategic if they do retaliate against Israel, which I doubt they will. Like I said, I think they're going to start playing a more mid to long term, type of strategy.
Right. Irina, meanwhile, the United States says it's concerned that the cycle of tit-for-tat strikes between the Middle East's largest military powers could lead to a full-scale regional war as we speak. But what role do you think the US is playing in helping simmer tensions in the Middle East at the moment?
Actually, US role has been largely counterproductive because it has constrained at various points in time Israel's deterrence value. It has constrained its own deterrence value. It has limited its response to the Houthis in particular, and has given them a lifeline, not only by taking off the FTO list in the beginning of the Biden administration, but never fully reapplying sanctions and essentially playing financial games with them and making very limited strikes that did not fully degrade their capabilities, failing to disrupt smuggling operations by Iran and now increasingly by Russia, and even China is growing its hand inside Yemen at the moment. Even with Hezbollah, US has played such a cautious game that it's almost like it does not really see the big picture in the region. The fact that Iran's proxies are not just military components of the chaos, but they are also political movements which have used corruption, political ties, and organized crime and assorted other and ideological strategies to root themselves, entrench themselves.
Well,
in
many continue to actually
countries.
question the role that the United States is playing on ground zero. But thanks so much, Irina Sukuman, as always, for joining us, and Dr. Reza Khanzadeh for joining us with your assessment. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates. In other crucial news, a man has died and at least 30 more have been injured after a truck hit a bus stop near an Israeli military base north of Tel Aviv in what authorities are investigating as a suspected terror attack. Many of the injured were reportedly pensioners on a day trip to a nearby museum. Far-right National Security Minister, who is responsible for the police, has actually called for the family of the suspected attacker to be deported from Israel. But as you know, Israel is already fighting its enemies on multiple fronts in Gaza and Lebanon. But this attack raises a different question: how to keep its people safe from attackers already inside Israel who use vehicles as weapons. And Egypt's president has announced his country has proposed a 2-day ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, during which 4 hostages held in Gaza would be freed. There was no immediate comment from Israel or Hamas, as the latest talks were expected in Qatar, another key mediator. But President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said the proposal includes the release of some Palestinian prisoners and the delivery of humanitarian aid to besieged Gaza. Well, let's turn our attention now to the first visit by a Spanish president to India in 18 years. Spanish President Pedro Sanchez arrived in Vadodara in Gujarat early today for his early yesterday actually for the 3-day visit to India, during which he will be holding delegation-level talks with Prime Minister Modi. Now, during this visit, the Spanish president will be inaugurating the final assembly line plant of C-295 aircraft at Vadodara, a flagship Make in India initiative in the aviation sector, along with our Prime Minister. The plant, by the way, has been set up by Tata Advanced Systems in collaboration with Airbus Spain. But President Sanchez will also visit Mumbai, where apart from official engagements, he will interact with trade and industry leaders, think tanks, as well as the film industry. By the way, he's also going to address the 4th Spain-India Forum, and several MOUs and agreements are expected to be signed during this visit, which shall give a fillip to bilateral cooperation between India and Spain. Let's get you an update on the tropical storm Trami that made landfall in Vietnam. Well, days after causing widespread flooding and leaving at least 80 people dead in the Philippines, Trami reached land near the central Vietnamese city of Da Nang just yesterday. Vietnam's National Met Agency has said on social media that the storm was producing maximum wind speeds of about 19 miles per hour below hurricane strength, but the storm had moved west across the South China Sea from the Philippines after killing at least 80 people. This tropical storm caused widespread flooding in several Philippine provinces, forced over 500,000 people from their homes, and damaged nearly 30,000 homes, leading to power disruptions in more than 150 cities and municipalities. To Japan now, where the ruling coalition is projected to lose its parliamentary majority in Sunday's general election, casting uncertainty over the government's future. But Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba called the snap vote with the aim of securing a clear mandate to govern after replacing Fumio Kishida as head of the Liberal Democratic Party, which leads the current coalition a month ago. Losing the majority could create a quagmire regarding the legislative process, a scenario which may not bode well for the yen and the Nikkei, at least in the short term, as per some market analysts. But the potential for a minority coalition raises the likelihood that the next government would increase spending, setting up a conflict with Ishiba and the Bank of Japan's more hawkish economic stance. As always, news and updates continue in a moment right after this very short break. Don't go anywhere. Well, Donald Trump hosted a rally featuring crude and racist insults at New York's Madison Square Garden, turning what his campaign had advertised as the event where he could deliver his closing message in the campaign's final days to an illustration of what turns off his critics. Several speakers insulted Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris, vying to become the first woman and black woman to win the presidency. And a stand-up comedian, by the way, made lewd and racist comments about Latinos, Jews, and black people, all key constituencies in the election just a few days away. While some Democrats and pundits have questioned Trump's decision to hold what they dismiss as a vanity event in his hometown, the rally, many argue, guarantees Trump what he most craves, which is the spotlight, the wall-to-wall coverage, as well as a national audience. And US Vice President Kamala Harris kicked off the last full week of campaigning at a church in Philadelphia in her latest bid to energize black voters, while Trump is betting on that famous New York City venue, Madison Square Garden, to give him that final stretch push. Harris planned to give a similar closing argument speech at the Ellipse near the White House just in another day, in about 24 hours, sandwiched between campaign stops in battleground states that conclude with rallies in Nevada and Arizona on Thursday. Trump's swing state schedule this week includes Green Bay and Wisconsin, meanwhile. Let's turn our attention now to the Russia-Ukraine war. Well, Russian forces thwarted an attempt at another cross-border incursion by Ukraine into southwestern Russia, a local official has reported, months after Kyiv staged a bold assault on its nuclear-armed enemy that Moscow is still struggling to halt. This, as Vladimir Putin has said that Russia's defense ministry was working on different ways to respond if the United States and its NATO allies help Ukraine to strike deep into Russia with long-range Western missiles. Let's turn our attention now to the neighborhood. Well, a major fire at a tissue paper factory in Peshawar's industrial estate continued to rage on, even after about 23 hours of firefighting efforts. Rescue officials have reported that the fire broke out in Hyderabad area, and despite extensive efforts, certain sections of that factory are still ablaze. Efforts, meanwhile, to extinguish the fire remain ongoing, with officials committed to ensuring the situation is brought under control as soon as possible. News now from China. Well, China will take countermeasures to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity, the government has said, lambasting a $2 billion arms sale package by the United States to Taiwan. The Pentagon said the United States had approved a potential $2 billion arms sale package to Taiwan, including the delivery for the first time to the island of an advanced air defense missile system battle-tested in Ukraine, including advanced surface-to-air missile systems and radar. The deal, though, awaits approval by Congress. And the Shenzhou 18 crew aboard China's orbiting Tiangong space station is preparing for their return mission while wrapping up the remaining experiments. 3 astronauts were sent into space for a 6-month mission in April this year, and they are expected to hand over with the members of the Shenzhou 19 at the space station in late October. But over the past week, the astronauts continue to carry out experiments in space material science, microgravity fluid physics, and combustion science as well. They replaced the plug-in burner of combustion cabinet gas experiment and samples of fluid physics experiment cabinet as planned. And finally, India's Arman Bhatia completed a historic treble at the PWR India Masters event for pickleball, winning all 3 championship finals. Heading into the final day of the tournament, Arman Bhatia had qualified for the finals of the men's singles, doubles and the mixed doubles finals. And after a tough start to the singles final against Dusty Boyer, Bhatia toiled hard and came back from a set down to winning 2-1, claiming the first of his 3 wins of the night. The other 2 finals proved to be quite one-sided as the Indo-Dutch duo of Bhatia and Van Rieck won in mixed doubles, while Harsh Mehta helped Arman Bhatia complete the treble in men's doubles. Thank you for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. As always, we'll keep tracking the latest updates for you. Do stay tuned.